So a few people asked specifically about Henry Ford or the role of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in the United States. So I wanted to look at this document from 1920. It's an article that Henry Ford printed in his personal newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. Henry Ford was a radical anti-Semite, and had been influenced by others to really take up the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, publish them, publicize them, and Ford really had all kinds of ways of talking about, I think, some of the ideas that we see develop in the protocols, in his thinking about the place of Jews in the U.S. So I just want to kind of highlight a few things. I'll post the document for you to be able to read carefully and closely. I just want to point out a few things. So what he wants to say is there, for a long time, 2,000 years, he says, there's been anti-Semitism, but he says today, really, it's about something economic. And so he wants to say this is fair in a way that some of the other kinds of anti-Semitism haven't been fair. So borrowing from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, or a development in general of racial anti-Semitism, he says, the Jew, right, which is totally essentializing language already, to imagine that you can speak about a whole group of people as if they were one person, which is to say that they're all the same. So he says, that the reasons for his power, the Jew's power, for the reasons for his separateness and the reasons for his suffering can be defined and understood. So he wants to say in Russia, there are certain issues. Jews are blamed for communism, which he sort of says, right? He says, maybe it's serious, maybe it's not, when it's made as an accusation. But what he wants to say is, in the US, then we have to think about what is the particular problem, he imagines. So looking a little further down, he kind of uses what's maybe familiar language about what we would call being, I guess, politically correct today. He says, well, there will be efforts made to hush it up, as impolitic, for open discussion, right? That he wants to say anti-Semites will be accused of not following political correctness, but he wants to say, I'm going to tell you the truth, and that requires not being politically correct, because only the truth, right? That political correctness then is somehow imagined as part of a conspiracy, I would argue, as part of the Jewish conspiracy, to hold back other groups, other nations, and to control not just nations, but the whole world. So he says, the Jew is the world's enigma. And here's where I think we can see a little bit of a difference, where he has a nuance in how he argues, where he's going to borrow from the protocols, and yet he's going to try to say, this is why it's okay to say these things about Jews in the United States. Because poor in his masses, he yet controls the world's finances. Right? So he kind of goes back over and over to say, not all Jews are wealthy, but because there are some Jews who are wealthy, that wealth is yielded in a way that is predatory, which is amazing for such a wealthy man to be saying, right? So he says, scattered abroad without country or government, he, meaning Jews, yet presents a unity of race continuity which no other people has achieved. So it's a little bizarre, right, in the context of nationalism, to say this group of people is so much alike and that's what's wrong with them, even as other people are arguing, here's what our nation has in common. But it is a way of saying they are a nation unto themselves, even though they don't have a territory, right? That they're basically, he's saying, a parasitic nation. That they're a nation that doesn't have territory, And that's the motivation maybe for trying to take down the whole world, is to take over territory that Jews don't have. Okay, so for one thing, he sort of thinks that way, but he also thinks, as he said, at the same time that Jews have been living under legal disabilities in almost every land, he has become the power behind many a throne. So this conspiracy for Ford is not new. He wants to say that it's always basically been the case that Jews, as kind of clever and tricky, that this is sort of what we see as undergirding the protocols, and then even Ford's kind of cultural translation to the United States, that they are actually manipulating kings and queens all over the world, or even presidents, things like that. So I think this last paragraph that I've highlighted is really important, that he says it would be very simple to answer that the Jews came to America, took their chances like other people, and proved more successful in the competitive struggle. But that would not include all the facts. And so then two things are important to him. One, as he says, all Jews are not rich controllers of wealth, right? So he appears to make a subtle argument, something almost different from the protocols, where Jews and money or gold are really tightly associated, that often people might say all Jews are rich, something like that. That certainly isn't true. And here Ford is saying, no, it's definitely not true, but don't let that fool you, is kind of his anti-Semitic position. He says, well, it may be true that the chief financial controllers of the country are Jews. It is not true that every Jew is one of the financial controllers of the country. Okay, so not all Jews are wealthy, not all Jews are running the conspiracy, but everyone running the conspiracy is Jewish, right? That those who do have the wealth and power are running a conspiracy. And this is a problem then for Jewish solidarity. He imagines that Jews all over the world are supporting each other in a way that allows them to fulfill this conspiracy. And so then here's why he says he imagines that it's not true that Jews, like any other immigrants, took their chances in the US. When certain Jewish immigrants came to the United States with the financial backing of European Jewry behind them, it would be unfair to explain the rise of that class of immigration by the same rules which account for the rise of, say, the Germans or the Poles, who came here with no resource but their ambition and strength, right? So he wants to say Jews came here not as poor immigrants in the same way that any other group of people came as poor immigrants. He says, basically, because there's Jewish solidarity, all Jews actually had access to this kind of network. And so it isn't true in his mind that everybody in America has the same shot. He thinks Jews had a better shot. Whereas the reality would be something more the opposite, that certain groups had much more advantages in the past and in the present for access to rights that should be granted to all immigrants or all citizens, but that in practice are not applied evenly in the same way. So here we have a really good example of how to see ways that the protocols influence thinking all over the world. Many Americans read this paper and believed it to be true, believed the protocols to be true. Many Americans also really didn't believe it. Okay, I think that's important to state, that there's no one way that we can characterize any country, that there are people fighting for Jewish emancipation or citizenship or rights, equality, all those things in all different kinds of places. And sometimes when violence breaks out, those people are equally targets along with Jews. But this is a good example. Ultimately, there was a lawsuit that this was libel against Jews, and so Ford had to publicly repudiate it, to say that it wasn't true. But the fact was, it was already out there. Many people were convinced by it and probably just saw that trial as another part of the Jewish conspiracy.